This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the NEGOTIATEx podcast. Really good one here, and I'm just going to get right into it, turn it over to Aram to introduce our guest.
Yeah, thanks, Nolan. So today we have an opportunity to just take a time out from where we've been and talk about what's going on in Ukraine right now. And I'm very appreciative to our team for being flexible, but also to our guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment, for adjusting his schedule to be with us. A week ago, Russia invaded the Ukraine, so I have former students that are Ukrainian. They reached out trying to take action. They're based here in the U.S., wanted to get involved, trying to help with policy and other things back home for them. And so I reached out to a group of fellow negotiators to see who might have some connections with folks who have done work there. And I was very fortunate to be connected to our guest today. And I asked him if he'd come on and just share some of his insights through a negotiation lens. We're hearing so much in the media from different talking heads, with different objectives and different backgrounds, to really just kind of look at this problem set now and what's occurring in Ukraine through the lens of negotiation. So our guest today is Arthur Martirosyan. Arthur is a negotiation and mediation specialist with over 27 years of experience in the design and implementation of strategic dialogue programs. This has been everywhere from Russia to Georgia, Israel, Palestine, Iraq, Kosovo, Serbia, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ukraine, and many other countries. He is a trainer in leadership, negotiation, cross-cultural communication for both public and private clients in several dozens of countries. He speaks 9 different languages. He has a master's degree from Yale in international relations, and he has worked with some of our colleagues at Conflict Management Group, Mercy Corps, and now the Bridgeway Group. So Arthur, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you. Very troubling times, but I think we need to be talking from the negotiation perspective about what's going on. It's very important that we do not forget that if there is a way out, it's going to be at the negotiation table.
Arthur, to get started, and just maybe before we get into discussing Ukraine, would you be willing to share with us just a little bit about your background? How did you get into the field of negotiation, and specifically, how did you get working in this region of the world?
Yeah, well, I was born in the Republic of Georgia, former Soviet Union, in Tbilisi. I'm ethnic Armenian, and then you mentioned I came to Yale for my degree. Actually, I was one of the first students from the former Soviet Union at Yale. And then about the time of graduation, one of my professors recommended to talk to his colleague, Professor Roger Fisher, who needed a consultant on conflicts in Georgia. And that's how I joined Conflict Management Group. It was in 1994. And ever since, I thought in the beginning that it would be just a couple of years, just gaining practical experience of what I've been exploring theoretically. But then this work really dragged me. I think I went not just through transformation in my perspective of what can be done in conflict management, but also personal transformation. I came as a somewhat skeptic about this kind of the can-do approach to conflict management, as I was seeing it from more kind of scholarly perspectives in Yale's conflict resolution programs. But as I started to work, especially
Seeing
with
it
Roger,
from
more
Bill Urey
scholarly
and many
perspectives,
other colleagues,
Yale's conflict resolution
sure
programs.
most of the
But
names,
as I started to
from
work, especially
Harvard
with Roger,
Negotiation Project,
Bill
Harvard,
Urey, and many other colleagues. School, I'm sure that most of the names that we share, from Harvard Negotiation Project, Harvard blessed to Law School, work with so many colleagues that we share, talented and gifted, and I've been blessed to be able to work with so many talented and gifted people in very different conflicts, and I could see that if you do the process right, chances are that you will get good outcome.
And so thank you for that path.
So thank you for.
And I do want to make sure everyone knows. And I do want to make sure everyone knows that I didn't just ask you to be on because you are a fellow Armenian. But that is definitely a plus.
Again, Arthur, thanks
for sharing a bit about your background.
Hey, Arthur, as we kind of get started here, I was hoping you kind of set the stage for us between understanding the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Does that go back to 1989, or is it further than that, or is it sooner than that? Just kind of set the groundwork for understanding that in the negotiations context.
Well, history is very important for understanding this conflict because it's part of the identity, both Russian and Ukrainian identity. And there's no surprise, when you have a conflict, the sides have very different interpretations of that history. We could go back to the medieval history or even earlier medieval history, but I don't think it's that important. What's important is the history of nationalism and imperialism, Russian imperialism, Ukrainian nationalism, and that's probably end of 19th century Ukrainian nationalism, and that's probably the formation of the Ukrainian nation as a political nation has its beginnings there. I think attempts to create an Ukrainian nation state during the First World War towards the end of the First World War, where abortive, as you know, attempts to create and survive for too long, as many others in the Eurasian space, because they quickly came under the Soviet control, and it's paradoxical, but under the Soviet Union, the current configuration of Ukraine, if we look at its they quickly came under had the biggest gains in the Soviet period. We begin with 1939, a very important point, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. If we look at when Poland was divided by Nazi Germany and Bolshevik had the biggest gains in the Soviet period. It was the gain of Western Ukraine, essentially, 1939, and it was a very traumatic experience. An experience that not many Russians want to really appreciate. Imagine one day you wake up and you are told that you are a citizen of a different country, and that country now looks at you as a petty bourgeois nationalist, as an enemy of the and it was a very traumatic experience. And at best, since your relatives want to really parents to Siberia, what would have been the response to that? Then comes World War II. No surprise that many Ukrainians, after that traumatic experience of communicating with NKVD, really turned against the Soviets. But it is not like they were fighting for the Third Reich. They were fighting for Ukraine, Ukrainian nation. Parents to Siberia. When they saw that Nazi Germany had no designs, then comes World War II. Independence. No surprise, they turned against Nazi Germany too. So they were fighting the Soviets. They were fighting Nazi traumatic experience. And it's a very complex history. So I don't want to spend all of our time really discussing that history, but it's important to understand how it now impacts the identity. We talk about this war, and often in media I read Ukraine. Yes, Russia invaded Ukraine, but there is also a subset. When they saw that Nazi Germany formerly Ukrainian citizens from Donbass, who've been in conflict with they turned against and who have joined now Russia. So it's a kind of has this element of a civil war, because much of the fighting in Donbass right now is done by those Luhansk and Donetsk, and these are mostly Russian-speaking Ukrainians, and this divide of religion, uniats in the West, Catholic and Orthodox, yes, Orthodox in the East, although I don't think for the East it's so much the religion that matters, but the language definitely does. And it was played, and language as a factor in this conflict, played a huge role. So where we are now much of the fighting in Donbass, as I said, if you talk to Ukrainians, you will get a history that Donetsk. You won't recognize if you had spoken to a Russian before that, because the Russian narrative is very different from the Ukrainian nationalist narrative. So there is a clash of these narratives, and they play much bigger role for both Ukrainians and Russians than it may look from the outside. Because for Russians, the history of the Second World War, and especially in the last decade, or couple of decades, when Putin turned that into one of the cornerstones of the new Russian identity, the memory of the war. 40 million people dead. I mean, that's still traumatic. That still has its presence. And that memory, again, as I said, also is politically manipulated. And unfortunately, the leaders of Ukraine from outset, from 91 to the date, were not able to find some modus vivendi where the Western Ukrainian nationalists and the Russian-speaking pro-Russia groups could find some kind of balance. It was either dominance of one group over the other, with grievances really driving the political process to a zero-sum games, or it was really seen as its presence, a field for Russia to intervene and to pick and choose someone who would drive Ukraine closer to their outset from 91 to yes, history. I mean, we're not able to pay close attention to both narratives, and maybe find some places where it's possible to reconcile. If it's all possible. I remember on one of my trips to Ukraine, I happened to be in Lviv, that's Western Ukraine, on May 9th. And there was nothing really big happening on that day, except that people were not really happy about it celebrated as a holiday in Russia. And on the same day, later on the same day, I was in Donetsk on business. And for them, it was the biggest holiday. So they have not only clash of narratives, formatting their identities, they have clash, anthropological clash almost of worldview, of vision for Ukraine and its relationship both with narratives, both Russia and Europe. Find some places where it's possible to reconcile, if at all possible. I remember on one of my trips to Ukraine, I happened to be in Lviv, that's Western Ukraine, on May 9th. And there was nothing really big happening on that day, except that people were not really happy about it celebrated as a holiday in Russia. And on the same day, later on the same day, I was in Donetsk on business. And for them, it was the biggest holiday. So they have not only clash of narratives, formatting their identities, they have a clash, anthropological clash almost of worldview, of vision for Ukraine and its relationship with both Russia and Europe.
Arthur, and you started to lay out there kind of part of the complexity of this from a negotiation perspective. So often we think of the kind of the different parties involved, and we can think of countries, the parties within a country, which I feel like you're describing was within Ukraine, certainly Ukraine, Russia, regionally. Then, as we think about Belarus and the Crimea and other European countries, we see Germany, taking some actions that are unique and new. And then if we think more globally in the role of China, NATO, and the U.S., is it helpful at all to kind of think of all of those as separate yet connected negotiations? How are you kind of putting all those different players together? How do you think about it?
Well, you're right. I mean, this conflict has multiple layers. I mean, if it's almost like this Matryoshka doll. The bigger doll is certainly the conflict over Russia's attempt to redesign the European security architecture, and obviously their conflict with NATO over expansion. Then under it is Ukraine. Russians, I think, in the 90s were not powerful enough to throw the challenge that they have thrown to NATO and to the US right now. And therefore, it was kind of a grievance that they had to live with. So, with Putin and him getting much stronger in military terms, anyway, not as a superpower, because if you look at Russia and many other variables of power, it's still economy and population and whatnot. It is no match to NATO. But given that it's a nuclear power, and given the some of the technological achievements that they had in designing new weapon systems, I think he decided that it's time to throw that challenge. And within that challenge was their perspective on how they want to see a future of the Russian Empire. We should call things as they are. It is an empire, and I think their approach was something that international relation theorists explain by an abbreviation, NUPIMB, which means no unfriendly power in my backyard. So essentially they were viewing Ukraine, Georgia, and all these conflicts to a large degree were dependent on their perspective that these countries and others may be joining NATO and seeing as a threat to their security. And no matter how much NATO countries and the US were giving them assurances that advancement was not a threat to them, they were not persuaded that it was not. So for Ukraine, is not just another foreign country for Russians, obviously, and I think they drew some kind of a red line on what they're going to be doing if Ukraine were to try to uh, cede to NATO or become NATO member. Not so much European Union, maybe, although that was also painful for them. And part of this pain, Russian pain, comes from a bigger issue, which is after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they haven't been able to come up with any attractive model for that backyard that they want to have influence in. If it's all about market economy and democracy and liberal values, why any of these countries should look at Russia? The West offers better kind of transition plans, visions of what these countries should be. So if you don't have a vision or nothing to offer, and the Russian model definitely is not acceptable for countries that do not have the same resources. So the Russian kleptocracy and corruption and the model that they have, a very, very vertical model that they have built, and maybe other models would have not worked in an empire, is not acceptable to Ukrainians, is not acceptable to Georgians, and that's where you have also this kind of a clash of ideas, a clash of ideas. Now, other players, it's very important to understand, or as we say in negotiation, to read the game, right? So we want to understand what this game is, and is it possible to change or not? Many Western observers have been quite rightly describing Putin's game as brinkmanship. Yes, it is brinkmanship, and if we want to understand what drives brinkmanship, I think we can turn to some of the literature on Sicilian mafia, and Diego Gambetta provided probably the best insights into that kind of mindset. So, what's important for that kind of a player is the reputation. Is the reputation. If he makes a threat or if he draws a line, he'd better deliver because others are watching. And it's not a single or a one-off game of chicken run or other brinkmanship or zero-sum games. It's iterative game. So China is watching, and not only China, everybody else is watching whether Putin, after drawing the red lines, is going to act on them or not. He did in 2014. That kind of thought that that should be enough to secure a weak Ukraine that would be not possible to become either EU member or NATO member because it has open conflicts. And if you look at the EU criteria or NATO criteria, countries that have, and right now there are, with Ukraine, there are 5 candidates, and Ukraine just yesterday got the candidate status with EU to begin the negotiation for accession. So the stumbling blocks for Serbia, for North Macedonia, and others are the conflicts, either secession or problems with the neighbors and so forth. So in the Russian thinking, that should have been enough to stop the Ukraine's desire to move west. But they were not, because even with the change of administrations after elections, when Zelensky was elected, they had hopes that this should be enough, and now they could negotiate with with Zelensky on their terms. But it didn't quite work that way. And as time was going by, they could see that it's almost like this classical paradigm of Athens watching Sparta become stronger. And it has protectors. It has very powerful protectors who strengthen this Sparta. And you know that one day they might be challenging you militarily. Militarily, not Russia, but the talk of repeating the Croatian military operation Storm when against Crimea was a very powerful model that was the Ukrainian elites, political elites, have been talking about for a long time. And moreover, they, in their military doctrine and foreign policy doctrine, obviously they were talking about how they're going to bring back not only Donbass or the parts of Donbass that were occupied by Russia or Russian proxies, but also Crimea. And now, if you go back to Putin and his mindset, it's not about economy for him as much. It's about his name and his legacy. How is he going to go down the Russian history as the man who not only brought Russia up from its knees, from the humiliation of the collapse of the Soviet Empire, or is he going to be remembered as the one who really accommodated and led NATO and Russia's adversaries, this is their narrative, obviously, it's not me speaking now, advance and get as close to the Russian borders as Kharkiv and other places. So it's, as I said, it's a very complex, but we in the business of negotiation need to understand how the other side thinks. And that doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything that they say or accept substantive merits of their claims. But I need to understand how they're thinking, because if I don't, I would not be able to change that. Now, a big question is, did the West misread Mr. Putin? There is volumes of literature on who is Mr. Putin from 2001, and some of the best probably books have been written by my former colleagues, Fiona Hill's text, Angela Stant, and many others have written about Putin. Did they really misread him? I don't think it's so much about misreading. I mean, I was rereading Henry Kissinger's essay that he wrote on March 5th, 2014, when conflict over Crimea was in a very intense stage. And I think he then got so many things right. But policymakers, because also of the clash over other issues with Putin, not just Ukraine, we need to bring back the whole history of US presidential elections, his role, and perspective on Putin as somewhat, evil and crazy player. But you know that craziness is also part of zero sum gaming, and that's his favorite game. If you are playing a zero sum game, you need to not only say what you're gonna do, even if that's unthinkable. You have to make sure that the other side understands that it's credible. You're gonna do it. You're going to do it. Obviously, we now can talk whether this war was possible to avoid, or Putin could have been really brought to a table to change his mind on things. We can certainly analyze some of that, but a bigger question now for me is, can Zelensky negotiate, and he's negotiating, not directly, but through his representatives. Can they negotiate? And can the West negotiate with Mr. Putin? And this brings me to uh, probably one of the best conceptual frameworks on that issue, provided by Professor Bob Nukin in his seminal text, Bargaining with the Devil. We need to understand, is it negotiable or not, and how to really think about the issue of negotiation. Right now, I think it's more of a reaction, and the sanctions and the severity of sanctions. One could say that if they didn't work in 2014, they probably will work now. And my take on this is that in 2014, I was skeptical about the sanctions. And I'll tell you why, because there were so many loopholes and opportunities for Russia to, soften the blow from those sanctions, that they were even counterproductive in some ways, in retrospect. Because in the Russian thinking and perspective, if these are your sanctions, if these are the losses that you frame for us, then instead of trying to avoid those losses, will act on avoiding the risks of losing Ukraine, risks to our security, and so forth. And so they thought that this time, maybe they were surprised by the unanimity of the West, and they use now the term the collective West. How unanimous they were in their approach, and even Germany, that is now in pain. The price of natural gas is over $2,000 per thousand cubic meters right now. So it's very painful, but they stood all together. That's one surprise probably for Putin. Well, with some maybe still softer on sanctions than others. But most surprising was the scale of this protest in the Western countries, and it's on the level, it's about their athletes, about their cultural exchanges. So it's almost Russia in isolation, and that probably was, and airspace closed, right? I mean, and I think the U.S. is closing its airspace to Russian civilian aircraft. So it's isolation. But I think they were preparing for these sanctions. It's not like, I mean, he made the decision and was not thinking what the next move by the West. I mean, maybe he was surprised, but as I said, I mean, we need to still be asking those questions that Bob Nukin has, the 5 questions, and one of them is essentially on the alternatives. If we do not negotiate, what? And what's going to happen to our interests? And do we have interests that is going to be to come to a cost to us? And on economic issues, it's paradoxical, but even right now, as we speak, the warfare, very intensive warfare that Europe hasn't seen since World War II. Natural gas flows from Russia through Ukraine to Poland and to Germany. And in fact, it's at its peak of exporting. So I'm leaving economic stuff out. I'm not an economist to discuss about it, but I can certainly see areas where, without systemic cooperation, we may be not able to achieve our goals. And that probably would be other negotiations, Iran. That could be probably negotiations on climate change, because you cannot isolate a country the size of Russia and really speak about effective measures to uh, prevent the climate change. And there are many others probably. I'm not. I haven't done a systematic analysis of what's at stake here, but I encourage most people, especially in our field, negotiation, to think about it from that perspective rather than, and I understand the emotional outbursts, but we have to be also cold headed. It's difficult for me. I can tell you, because every day I get the news, and I take my news not just from media. I try not to get into media even. I take it from my colleagues and friends in Ukraine. So I don't need to be told how stressful, emotionally difficult it is when missiles are flying, when civilians are dying, and when you not only don't know how to escape, blocked in an urban area, but you don't even know what to put on the table for your kids. So emotionally, it's difficult. But I encourage everybody to take a step to the balcony, and that's what we do professionally, and say, so what's at stake for us, and what it means even for Ukraine if they don't negotiate right now. What it's going to be like.
Well, let's go. You've offered so much there in terms of why Putin's making this choice, because it certainly feels like an alternatives move by Putin to go to war. The sanctions are also kind of an alternatives choice, and why that might be. And then I appreciate the complexity, both of the issues involved, and then all the different countries and parties. And I think it's helpful for folks to understand just how broad and challenging this is. A couple days ago, Arthur, there was the 5 hour negotiation between representatives of Russia and Ukraine. Um, do you, if you could imagine being in that room, what were they discussing, and is there really room here for some sort of creative solution that's better than some compromise that takes us back to Minsk or 2014?
Look, we don't know much about what was negotiated. Some reconstructive work is possible. I'll start with a very simple proposition. It would not make a sense for the Ukrainian delegation to cover the distance, and they went via Poland to Belarus. So instead of traveling 300 kilometers, they traveled 1,300 kilometers to get to that room for 5 hours, as you said. If they came there just to trade their positions, they are known, they are public. The Russians could have provided their narrative in 5 minutes, and Ukrainians in less than 15 seconds, just as the most popular meme these days is about the Russian ship. Russian ship, go do that yourself, right? So, but if they're getting to the table, we understand that they have things to discuss. And obviously, one of the themes was how to end hostilities, how to end this war. My sense from following reactions of Zelensky after the team came back and instructed him, and at that table, by the way, not only these two teams representing presidents were negotiating, they were taking breaks to call the presidents and to consult with them on what was going on at the table. So we can understand that you make a call when an option is on the table, right? Otherwise, I mean, you can respond to almost anything, but you cannot react to an option without checking uh, with your boss. In this case, President Zelensky and Putin. Moreover, uh, Zelensky and Putin were taking that time also to talk to European leaders. We know that Putin talked to Zelensky to Macron at that time, and Zelensky talked, I think, to several, including President Biden, Macron, and Chancellor Scholz. So again, a very complex setup of the table, right? And so what were they negotiating? The theme is obvious. Did they come to that negotiation? I mean, what's the perspective? I wouldn't say Russia has a Batna here. They have a Watna. It's a worse alternative to negotiated agreement, because war is not serving one of the most important, I mean, at least at the propaganda level, discussed issues, right? So we're not going into Ukraine to occupy or to kill civilians. We have another agenda. But as the war continues, as I said, more civilians are killed, and more hatred there is, even for the people who probably were more loyal to good relationships with Russia. and it's natural. I mean, that's the reaction. And it's so it's a what now. But as they negotiate with Ukrainians, they want to show to them that if Ukraine does not accept, and we know what they want Ukraine to accept, then Ukrainian Watna is going to get to what my Israeli colleagues call Shatna. Okay, so shitty alternative to negotiating. Sorry, my friend.
That's a new Arthur. That's a new one. I hadn't heard that one before.
Right. So that's what's essentially going on at the table. Look, it's going to worsen for you because our military is going to take more territory, except what we have right now, the option, the package that we have on the table, or it will be worsening by the day. You will be missing an opportunity. And so the goal of the Russia is doing it by its military campaign on the ground. Every day we hear that they are blocking another town, they're moving. There is some analysts even are suggesting that there may be a repeat of what Ukrainians experienced in 2015 when some of their brigades were taken in cauldrons, in pincer moves, and was encircled and then decimated. And Minsk, by the way, agreements were signed under those circumstances, and that's why Zelensky, when he came to power, he was saying we cannot accept the Minsk agreement because they were signed with the gun at our head. But they are right now again negotiating. The gun is not at the head. The gun is shooting. It's not aimed at the head yet, but it's shooting. Now, why Russians would negotiate then with Zelensky? And by the way, Putin is avoiding to be talking to Zelensky directly. Why would he negotiate? And well, as I said, I mean, he also wants to end this quickly, because if it doesn't, it's I don't know. There are some very nasty scenarios of urban warfare and casualties. I mean, if you start bombing, like it was happening in Syria, Iraq, and other places, and you cannot take cities otherwise. As we talk, they haven't started the storm of Mariupol yet, but it's encircled and most likely 500,000 population city, not evacuated, is going to see urban warfare from their basements. And I dread to think what the number of casualties might be. And we see the same happening in Kharkiv, by the way. So this is the negotiation. And back to my question, why he's negotiating. One is that. And the other is he needs Zelensky. That might sound paradoxical, but he needs Zelensky. Why? Because if Zelensky signs, essentially, I mean, they try not to frame it as capitulation. So they avoiding that term, but we all understand what it is. If he signs it, he is the legitimate president of Ukraine. He is accepted by the West, and so the West will accept what Zelensky does. So this is the thinking behind these negotiations. And they didn't end in Pripyat just the other day. They were supposed to negotiate this morning, but the second round has been postponed now to tomorrow, I think. Are they going to be able to negotiate these terms that I narrated or not? Very much depends on what happens on the ground. Because the Ukrainian military made almost a kind of desperate counterattack move last night to get to Horlovka. That's right now in the depth of Donetsk controlled area by the military. So they were trying to demonstrate that we are there, we're going to fight, and it's not going to be easy for you, Moscow, to do. So they have, both sides are facing these dilemmas. How they're going to act at the table, as I said, much depends on what's going to be able to happen beyond the table. And unfortunately, I think the West doesn't have any say in this because they can continue with the sanctions, but they are not going to stop Putin. They're not going to stop Putin because, as I was talking about Gambetta's study, his reputation is now at stake, and there is no easy face saving. There is no golden bridge that can be built for him to walk back from this. And this is the tragic and unfortunate moment in European and maybe world history. And he's trying to show also to the West, you think I'm crazy, but I showed you that I did what I told I'd do. And if you try to intervene militarily, I'm going to respond. And that's why they were kind of putting on DEFCON 2 their triad, the nuclear triad, right? Testing and showing what they're capable of doing. And kind of resolve, don't test us. If you do, we're going to respond nuclear. Any player tries to intervene. Supplies of weapons, arms, I don't think it's going to be that problematic, although the West is also very careful. In NATO countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, they've said they're not going to be doing that. Others have agreed to. But, how can you deliver those things to Ukraine? It's either Poland, the countries neighboring to them, right? There is no the military infrastructure, airports, airfields, almost all of them have been either destroyed or under attack. So when it comes to demilitarization of Ukraine, I can see how maybe with huge losses to both sides, Putin can achieve that goal. His second goal, though, is very problematic. I cannot really understand how they want to achieve that, but that is also on the table for Zelensky. And they are talking about denazification. This is, again, quote unquote, that term, denazification of Ukraine. On par with Nazi Germany post World War II. How do they see that happen? I mean, the Soviets and NKVD after World War II were not able to suppress the Ukrainian nationalist underground movement, which was a guerrilla movement, warfare. Not at times very intensive, but it was a pain, a royal pain for the Soviets. And the last one to come out from underground and surrender was in 1962. 1962. So don't test the resolve of Ukrainians to resist. This is going to be a headache. And some Western observers have been throwing in this theme of Ukrainians fighting as part of the Soviet Red Army in World War II, and how many heroes of the Soviet Union they provided and whatnot. So they are capable fighters. They have history, and maybe even unlike Russia, their kind of military traditions go to their Cossack history. And I think, you could say, what does it have to do? Because that's where they, that's their source of inspiration, kind of in their Weltanschauung, their worldview. The Ukrainian is a valiant soldier who does not yield, fights to the very end. And that's why I'm saying this war is not going to give the results that Putin wants to achieve. Maybe he can even dismember the country, but part of it will still remain Ukraine, and part of it will still be, as he says, posing that same threat. So he's not. The best way would have been to negotiate all the issues. And to be frank with you, I'd say that most of the issues could have been negotiated. The first opportunity was lost in 2014 when Russia overreacted. And the second one was obviously from December to February 24th. There were lots of missed opportunities to negotiate, but by and large, they come out of distrust. Not only distrust to Zelensky or Poroshenko before him that Putin and Russians have, but also distrust to NATO. we cannot trust your word because you promised NATO would not advance an inch in 1990, your unification of Germany, and yet NATO is here. Again, this is their narrative. I'm saying if we wanted to really persuade them that their concerns baseless, there could have been things done to address those concerns. And some of them are probably legitimate. You would not be able to persuade them otherwise that removing our military hardware to East European countries, and that's not a threat to you. And there is a question, what's the threat that you're trying to address by moving it there? Who's threatening you? And in their discourse, again, security discourse that I've been following, they have this huge issue of the US viewing Russia as an adversary, especially after 2014. So trust is a huge issue. And I think at war, it's very difficult to gain even the tactical trust. And that's why they've been trying to bring people, at least one name was circulated, that he was not at the table, but he was there, that both sides thought that he could be trusted. That's Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. He moved from UK to Israel, and he has huge contacts and relationships, business, and not only both in Ukraine and Russia. And that's an attempt to kind of to bring someone who would allow the parties at least to look at the tactical trust, because trust is not there. Very difficult to negotiate in a crisis when you do not have trust. And crisis negotiators know that they need to establish it. The tactical trust, I mean, not deep, maybe trust, long-term trust, but a tactical trust, right? What is it that you can do right now to show that you're gonna stay by what you're gonna commit at the table? So this is the biggest challenge, and I don't know how the next round is gonna end. That's tomorrow.
We were counting on you to tell us how it was going to end, looking into your crystal ball and letting us know how this plays out.
Unfortunately, as I said from the outset, and what I gave you is my reconstruction. I do not insist that this is the only right way of looking at what's happening there. I'm saying that I'm skeptical. I'd say, again, to quote my teacher, Roger Fisher, it's 60-40 for the success tomorrow. And I don't know which way is 40. I'd say I'm skeptical that they're going to be able to get things going. Although, there is some promising element in there too, because European Union has set Ukraine now on a fast process of negotiating the acceptance to, I don't know how fast that can be. But I can also imagine that that issue was also discussed at the table. So imagine, well, for instance, Russians are saying, okay, accept what we are telling you, and we don't have any problems with you going to European Union or deciding your future however you would want. So is it persuasive? Can Zelensky trust that that's going to be happening? They're not going to go and grab more. And I'll throw even one issue that acted as a spoiler in this whole game, and maybe accelerated, because in the beginning of this brinkmanship game, Putin's thinking was that, look, I'm putting my military in Belarus and the border with Ukraine, and that should be enough of a threat for the West and for the US primarily, and Ukrainians to take it seriously. And then he saw that not only his ultimatum proposition or demands on the security issues with NATO and Ukraine were not accepted. They were essentially rejected, except some minor things, and we need to understand that this is also the art of priorities, right? Politics as art of possible, and policy as art of priorities. So for him at that point, was obvious that now he is trapped, because not only internally he has drawn red lines, that he should go in. And he went, by the way, it was so fast that we probably lost track of chronologically. His next move was, I'm recognizing independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, not intervening yet militarily. I'm still standing there. I'm recognizing them. And that was an even stronger signal that he not might even, but almost inevitable now. And what was Zelensky doing on those days? He went to the conference in Munich, where he essentially said that it's a bluff, it's not serious. I mean, you remember that Biden was telling him it's imminent. Our intelligence says it's imminent. And he was saying, no, they're not going to do it. It's probably a bluff. Moreover, at that very conference, he started to talk about revisiting the Budapest memorandum on denuclearization and security guarantees that were offered by nuclear powers to Ukraine at the time, signaling that they might look into becoming a nuclear power. Back to into Putin's head, this is a huge threat right now, even probably bigger threat than NATO membership, because Sparta now is not going to be able to go and do what Croatians did in Krajina in 3 days, but they're going to have a huge deterring factor. So this is the time. That's why he was saying, I didn't have a choice. I don't believe there are such situations, no choice. But he framed it to his own population that we didn't have a choice. This is the only choice. And that is the only choice. We know there are nuclear power plants in Ukraine. The first one they got in control was in Chernobyl. And it's not reported that much in Western media, but it's now the Russian military and Ukrainian staff are jointly overlooking Chernobyl, the one that had the disaster, the Soviet time. But there are other nuclear power plants, and fighting right now goes around Energodar, which is in Zaporozhye and close to another nuclear power plant. There is also a nuclear power plant in Rivne. And does it mean that they're going to get in control of all nuclear power plants? I'd say right now, at least, that's their plan. That's their plan.
So, Arthur, let me ask you. There's just so much. Again, you've covered so much. I'm very grateful for your time. Um, is there, what should we in the West, those of us that are, concerned for Ukraine, what should we be pushing our leaders to do? So we heard, President Biden State of the Union last night. We've talked about just different actions to help. I don't know, to help in this conflict. A no-fly zone seems like it would be a direct conflict. It would engage and escalate the conflict. We hear senior leaders talking about President Putin as crazy, evil, stupid, and kind of talking about that publicly. Are those things helpful? What if as we get ready to see Ukraine and Russia go back to the negotiating table, and maybe there's some time here? How would you recommend? What actions would you recommend that would help kind of balance the negotiating table?
Well, it's a war, and I think there is not much. I don't know what the military strategists in NATO and other countries are thinking about doing right now. Weapon supplies, they're running out of their Javelin and Stinger kind of stockpiles. Ukrainians resupply them with more of those, kind of show Russians that there are even some volunteers or soldiers of fortune from all over Europe that are forming a legion of foreign legion of Ukraine. But I don't think those are going to be really significant in terms of the military. I'm not a military expert, but given the superiority in the sky and preponderance and the sheer power that Russia is able to unleash on Ukraine, I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a matter of time until they destroy. If it continues, it's just that it's the question is how long can the Ukrainian very capable military resist? You know, when you're running out of your oil, diesel for your tanks and armored vehicle carriers, when the sky is not yours, when you are also running out of ammunition, and when your troops are not coordinated, how long can you survive? Maybe they can in the guerrilla warfare move, but in terms of organized kind of military resistance, I think it's just a matter of time. And yet, I mean, back to your question, because I think it's a very important question. Sometimes people say, "So what can we do now? It's not the right time to do this or that." And I think the time is right for doing things, and for us negotiators too, because we should probably look beyond the military phase of this escalation of this conflict and look into what else is going to be negotiated once guns stop shelling. No, I'm very sympathetic to Ukrainians. My granddaughter came from school yesterday, and I'm just going to show you her drawing here. I don't know if it's a camera. Yeah, this is also I daily get, as I said, the news, and it's really difficult. I have to meditate daily to stay in my sane mindset. But this alone is not enough. Yes, I know that Ukrainians really appreciate all the help. Apple stopped selling their products to Russia. Two thumbs up. Ukrainians are very, but that is not going to stop the war. Um, and I cannot stop that war, obviously. But as a negotiator, I can think to the question that I already posed, questions that I posed. There are five actually from Bob Nukin on that conceptual framework. Do we negotiate with the devil? And I'm inclined to think right now that yes, we are. And you probably know this history, and that was a debate between Roger Fisher and Bob Nukin. I remember that in 2001 when George Bush received an invitation from Afghanistan from Taliban, Mullah Mohammed Omar, to negotiate. Uh, uh, Roger and I think Bob Nukin were invited by the administration to brainstorm: should we accept? Should we not accept? And at that time, well, Roger is from the school of you always need to negotiate, and that's what he was saying there. Yes, we need to negotiate with Taliban. If they want to negotiate, we need to negotiate. And Bob Nukin was of a different opinion. Obviously, Bob Nukin's opinion prevailed at that time, right? But we know that as time went by, almost 20 years, maybe less, we still have to go back and negotiate with Taliban. So here too, again, I mean, it will require very serious analytical effort to analyze, not emotionally react to what Russia is doing, but to think how's the West is the West going to negotiate with Russia, and if yes, on what? Is Ukraine going to negotiate with Russia? And if Russia and Ukraine make a deal, some kind of a deal, I mean, I don't know about ending the war, ending of the, would that signal to the West that they need? If I'm just thinking aloud, if Ukraine is going to become an EU member and is going to negotiate, there are so many things, not just energy, that will depend on how they settle with Russia. Are they gonna are they gonna negotiate? Are we gonna all negotiate? And if we are gonna negotiate on what? And how to think about those negotiations? because isolation, I think, works, but it's not the best solution to the problem. By the way, one of the uh, fathers of containment, George Kennan, one of the wisest U.S. diplomats. He was ambassador to Russia. He was a very key thinker on containment. He was saying that isolation is counterproductive. We need to keep the Soviets engaged with us, because if we are engaged, we still can influence. If we are not influencing them. So, with that, I mean, I'm not saying we need to do that right away. I don't think the Russian actions should not be condemned. I don't say that we should not be putting our best effort to stand by Ukraine. I'm saying we need to think also as negotiators, so that this war still has, believe it or not, a potential to escalate further. And I would not want to go back to the theme of guns in August of uh, 1914, when nobody really wanted to start a war, but it started. Here, one mistake, two mistakes, and we're not going to have an opportunity to revisit it and go back, because this war might be a disaster for the world.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Arthur. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
And thanks for all your insight into this. Truly an impactful listening to you explain everything. So, Aaron, I'll turn it over to you. Do you want to close this thing out?
Well, I just want to thank you, Arthur, for your time and insights. It's certainly given us a lot to think about, and I know for those listening, a lot of things just to kind of to ponder and consider. What's next, and what sort of conversations we can be having. Certainly want the Ukrainian people to know, our thoughts and prayers are with them, and we're going to continue to support them from a distance, and for Ukrainians living in the United States to know that if there's ways we can help support that community and that desire to help, we want to be doing that too.
There's no better way to close it out than everything that you already said. So definitely thank you again for your time, and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NegotiateX TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team, are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to negotiatex.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over the next video.